Hello, it's Jill Tisbury at FiredGlass here, and welcome to our first video of 2023. Some of you may know it should have been the last video of 2022, but we had a few technical difficulties and we've ended up reshooting it, but I'm sure it'll be a much better video. So I've got some other news as well. Some of you probably know this already because I know that you've been buying this and we've had some lovely comments about it. This is our ebook on painting with enamels, which is all about this little project here. There's a link on the screen to that and a few pages showing you what it looks like. But that takes you through step by step most of the things that I'm actually going to talk about today as well, and a few little extra bits as well. So you can see here that we are going to do this little chap. We've added 2 new courses to our course catalogue, so you could actually come in person and paint something like this as well. So we've got a 1-day course on enamels and we've got a 2-day course where you probably do something a little bit bigger. Now you can also see I've got some freeze and fuse on here for the background, and in the ebook there's a section on how to do the freeze and fuse elements. We're not going to do that today. We're actually going to just paint. I say just, it's going to take us quite some time, so it's a bit of a feature length jobby, so get your popcorn out. We're going to talk about how we get the image on here, how we do the underpainting, and then how we build up the layers so that we end up with something that's waiting to go in the kiln and be fired. This one's going to be slumped on an arch when we're finished, but for now let's get started, eh? So let's pop this chap over here. You can go and read the ebook for a bit. And this, as if by magic, is my outline. So, little bit about reference images to begin with. The reference image up here came from Flickr. It came from someone called Snapper 2006. What can I say? Again, reference images are a big bone of contention with people. You can't just pick up an image from the internet and just paint it. If it's your own image, and a lot of ours are because John's a really cracking photographer, so we tend to use our own reference images. But I was looking for something a little bit different and I found this one on Flickr. And somewhere like Flickr will have something called Creative Commons license, and that licensing will tell you what you're allowed to do with it. And this image Snapper had put up to say that I could do anything I want with the image as long as you reference the photographer and let people know whose was the original image. So that's what I'm doing. Big shout out to Snapper 2006. So how do we get the image onto the glass? Well, there's a number of ways of doing it. You can draw it. If you're not any good at drawing, there's no reason why you can't trace the outline. I've done this with a very fine Sharpie. Now, the reason I use a Sharpie is it burns off in the kiln. I know some people say that they have problems with it. I've never had an issue with Sharpie burning off in the kiln, but I do use a fine one instead of a thick one, and I only put the key lines that I actually need on here. So we've got an outline, we haven't got all the mega detail on there. That comes because we're actually going to build that detail up in the paint as we go. So let's talk about paint then. You may have seen some of the other videos that we've got. They talk about why I choose particular types of enamel over others, and what brands I actually like. And there's another one where we painted 2 little hairs, 2 little cutout hairs that we've used in projects. So again, there's links in the description below as there are to the ebook, but I am mainly, for this project, I'm mainly using Dove enamels. It's my favourite brand to use at the moment, but because we're in the UK, it's really difficult to get hold of the pinks. So this I find is perfect for me. UGC enamels come a very, very close second for me. So I also use UGC. This is UGC Mauve, and it's available from Creative Glass Guild. Well, that's where I got mine from. These are again, able to blend with the dove, absolutely no problem whatsoever. So the mauve is a perfect colour for if you're doing things like inside of ears or gums or nose. Lots of animals, they've got little pink bits on their nose and paws and things like that. So this is the perfect colour, so that's what we're going to use for that. The rest of the colours that I've got, obviously there's a large range of colours in the Dove brand, but for now I've got Harvest Brown, Dark Brown, Red Brown. You can see it's all the autumny shades, isn't it? I've got Poppy Red, Flame Red, what's this? This is Mandarin, Jet Black, and then I've got two whites. Now, there's a pure white and a zircon white, and if you're going to mix pinks, I'm actually not going to do too much mixing of pinks because I've got this mauve here, but if you are going to mix pinks, zircon white is a better base because it's a zircon base, so that's a much better base to use for pinks. So I'm going to alternate between these two. So I'm going to pop those over there for now because I don't need them. Just move those out the way so you can see what's going on here. I've got a palette here. I've got a couple of things to show you. This is, I'm not sure what it is, what kind of plastic it is, but it's very flexible, as you can see. I like this one because A, it's small, and I got this from some art shop somewhere, but I can't remember which one. But it's the kind of plastic that really is very, very easy to clean. So these, when we use these with layering mix, I'm going to talk about that in a second as well, it dries rock hard. So you want to be able to clean this easily. If you haven't got a palette, then this, hopefully you can see that. This is a little bit of acetate. It's what we used to put the front covers on the books with. And we had a load of this spare. It's really difficult to dispose of. So I just chop mine up and use it as palettes, which is great. And then I can actually get rid of it, you know, and just chuck it away if I don't want to clean it. So if you've got acetates or things like that, you can use, I guess you could use glass. You could make yourself a little glass palette, couldn't you, really? Okay. So enamels, we need something to mix them with. Again, we talk about this on the video that talks about the enamel paints. This is layering mix. You give it a good shake before you start because it can settle, and you want this to be, this is what it is, a little shot glass here with a little bit that I've decanted in there. But layering mix for me was a bit of a game changer because it allows you to put several layers of enamel on here and create a heck of a lot of depth. And so it's akin to when I'm painting with enamels or when I'm doing pastel artwork. I always would do an underpainting and I would build up the layers as I go, ending with a detail layer. Layering mix is a key thing. Now, if you can't get hold of layering mix, you can actually use gum arabic. It's really old-fashioned. It's what they used to use in the very early days of hot shops and things like that. But gum arabic is readily available from most catering suppliers, and that will dry rock hard as well. So there we go. The other thing that we've got is medium. There's lots of mediums on the market. This is just simply a water-based medium. It's actually the UGC one. I'm going to use that as we get further into the project, but I like to use this to create glazes. So when we paint in oil paint, quite often we would push things back, push colours back and subdue them a little bit with glazes, and this is perfect for that. So I'm going to show you how to do that a little bit later on. What else? Oh yeah, brushes. We need brushes, don't we? I've got 3 brushes here. I got this, which is a number 6 chisel brush. You don't have to have the exact brushes that I've got, but I'm just telling you what I'm using and why I'm using them. This is good for coverage, and I like the chisel because it's great for when we're trying to create that underlying depth of fur. So it's a number 6. I call it a 1/4 inch chisel brush, or 1/2 inch. That's probably more like a 1/2 inch chisel brush. This one is a 3-0. And it's just a round brush, and this is a 0, so this is much finer for detail work, so we're going to use those to do this painting. So should we get going? All good. I've got some black, so I'm going to start with. So for me, again, this is my process. You might do things slightly differently, but this is how I like to start my paintings and how I like to get going. So I'm going to take a little bit of mix here. Now, one of the questions I get asked is, why don't you mix up all of your paint? I don't use ready mixed enamels, so I don't use things like glass line, and I like to have it in these little bottles, because if I mixed all of this up, so if you can see how much is in there, if I actually mixed all of that up with medium, it's going to go rock hard anyway, especially if I'm using layering mix, and I like to alternate between the mediums. You can also mix with water, by the way, but the problem with that is that the paint comes off as you add the next layer on usually. So if I mixed it all up, it's then going to go hard and I'm going to have to reconstitute it, which I really don't want to do, because every time you do that, you're diluting your mix. So that's the jet black that I'm using. When this is dry, you'll actually see on here that it'll look like slate grey, but as you probably saw from the original that I put up there, the finished piece, it comes out as jet black. Now, I'm hoping you can see that. If I just push it from side to side, you can see how much I'm actually mixing here. Not very much at all, because I'm only going to do a tiny area on here, so I don't really want to mix up a load of colour, but it's almost like single cream. And I'm using this fine brush because I'm going to start with the blackest blacks. So the blackest black, if we look at our reference image here, and when I say blackest black, I mean blackest blacks. I don't mean just dark shaded areas. I actually mean these areas here, the nose, these little bits, and obviously the eyes. So the reason I'm putting these in is that these are going to give me a guide to the features as I put the base colour on. So I'm hoping you are able to see the detail of this. I'm going to start with the eyes, because obviously he needs to be able to see us while we're painting him. And I'm just going to get this detail in. Now, it seems counterintuitive that I'm doing detail at this stage, but we're going to come back and we're going to revisit all of these features. But for now, I just want to get these little areas in. Now, what you'll find as I start painting here is sometimes the paint just slides. So it just slides on the glass, and this is one of the reasons for underpainting, particularly with this stuff. Really helpful, because you want to get coverage on the glass so you haven't got any bald spots or any dots on there. So I'm just going to put the blackest black features in. So we're going to put the pupils in, just so that we've got an idea, an indication of where these are. Now, some people actually mix their paint with a palette knife as well. If I was making, you know, heaps of it, I probably would do that, to be fair. But I can get away with this because it's such a tiny amount. Now, the nose on here has got, you can see I've kind of marked that out there. So the nose on here has got a bluey white outline, or highlight I should say, not outline. So I am going to just do the blackest blacks, because that's what we are putting in here. Now again, you can see that I'm getting some texture on there as I'm putting it on. I'm twisting my brush there as I was picking the colour up so that I can get that colour onto my brush. I just want to try and get that area covered. We're going to come back, so don't worry if it's not fully covered. So he's got a little mouth under here as well. It's got a really dark area in there. And we've then perhaps just got a darkest area in the recess of his ears, and this darkest area here. Just want to try and get this little layer of paint on, and I'm going to mix a little bit more. And again, it's kind of a one-to-one mixture that we've got here. When you look at this piece here, there's a couple of lines just about there where this leg is. So it's worth, when you get your reference image, it's worth looking at the image and working out exactly what you are actually looking at. So here you're looking at the front paw that's bent over. So here is the top of one of his paws and that's the top of the other one. So this is the dark space between his tail and the ruff of his neck, and then this is the dark space just underneath his chin. And as soon as we start doing this and start putting it in, you start to really see the definition. So that bit there, I don't want to lose that because that's where that front paw is bending over, and I don't want to lose that because that's the little bit that he's wrapped his tail around his other paw. Over here, this is the back of the back leg. So that is his back haunch, and it comes down here like that. Hopefully you can see that. So you can see where the fur on this reference image is all sort of, looks like he's got a bit of a parting going on there. That is like the knuckle of his hind leg coming down here, and this bit here you just about see are all those tendons in that back leg. So I am just going to make sure that we don't lose that. So this here that I'm painting here, I can go over this later on, but this here is all that dark shaded area, and I'm not too worried about being really spot on with my sort of brush marks. I want to get the shapes in. Okay. Oh, that's my tummy. Can you hear my tummy? That's no good. Right. So that's cool. Just down here, just to finish this off, I'm just going to get a tiny little bit more. I just want this little base of colour just to remind me where these shadows are. So all up here, we've got some sort, it's not very thick, this paint at all. So this is one of the ways that you're going to control the I guess the depth really of what you're doing here. So it's almost like you get a bit of charcoal and you actually just put that first layer of underpainting onto a painting. We're doing a similar thing here, except we're doing it with a brush and we're doing it with some very weak mixed paint. Okay, so I think one more little bit I've just seen, so I'm just going to get a tiny bit of this. There we go. And then my blackest blacks will be done, and that's this bit here. So I just want to make sure I've got this bit here. And we talk about, as I say in the book, we talk about why we're doing this and the fact that we're getting all this area on here so that we know where we're going with it. I'm just having a quick look. Again, one of the techniques that we used to use when I was learning to paint and do stuff like this is a quick look from here to here, so as quick as you can, and you kind of blur the two images together and you can see any areas that you've missed. Okay, so happy with that. One of the things I didn't tell you I've got is just some water to clean my brush in, as opposed to cleaning it in my coffee, which is also one of the things that you could do, but I don't recommend it with enamel paint. Okay. Let's get rid of that, we don't want that one. So, I think we're ready to do our underpainting. Just move those out of the way. So I'm going to use this brush. This was the chisel brush that we talked about. Just get rid of that, because I don't want it. And I can pick up a fair amount of layering mix. So we're using layering mix all the time at the moment. We're not using any medium, okay? So looking at my image, and I want to work out what my base colour is going to be. I'm going to start with some Harvest Brown, and you can see how much I've got of this as I'm going through it. So I'm going to pick up a fair chunk of this. I'm going to start mixing it in here. So this is where, if you wanted to get rid of any, just a bit more of that, get rid of any lumps and bumps, you could use a little palette knife and do this. but I'm going to put some more colour in this at the moment. Let's get this on here. So this is a great colour. We're going to talk about colour windows in a minute, but I want a base colour that's roughly around here. But obviously if I hold this up here, you can probably see this is nowhere near, it's far too yellow. So we need to get more of this orangey colour on here. So losing my voice, that'll never do. Although John might say differently. Okay, this is red brown. I'm going to add some of that in there. I like to keep my lids together because you can see you can get all the colour in the top of the lid, so I don't want to mix that up. Now, when I start mixing these, I'm actually going to just mix a little corner of it and keep this area, because this fur is not just one colour, it's lots of different colours. Oh, where's that one? That one's over there. Let's move that. I'm going to brighten that up. There we go. So the tiniest amount, you get used to this as you go with mixing. It's way too dark at the moment for the colours I want, so I'm just going to go with a little bit more of this back into there. And we can brighten this up. This takes me back to infant school. My dad took me to school on my first ever day, and I was only 5, and he I think he thought I was a flight risk, so he was talking to me about all the friends I'd make all the way to school. And when I got there, they had powder paints. Do you remember powder paints? We used to have them in the UK. Everybody used powder paints. And they had powder paints there. Oh, that's getting closer. Not too bad. And there was a table with paper and paints. And I was only 5, and all the other kids were crying their eyes out. I think I'm good to go with that. I might mix a little bit more of that harvest brown in there as I go. Yeah, so all the other kids are crying their eyes out. And I saw the powder paint, sat down, started painting, and my dad went home crying, not me. Oh, bless. Right, so there we go. Let's just get this on. Now, you see what I said earlier on about you still get texture on this as you paint. This is all going to disappear, okay? So what I mean by the texture, you can see it's going on in sort of streaks, so it doesn't look very, well, very much like fur, really. But I am going to use this because this is pretty close to kind of these type of colours that we've got in here, yeah? So these sort of brown, mid-browns. These bits, the white bits and the dark bits, they come kind of a little bit further down the layers as we're adjusting the colours. But this is good for coverage, so we're going to be quite quick about how we cover this. Now, what you might see is that as I'm putting this on, did you see that? That is the centre bit down here, but as I go over here, I've twisted my brush over. I know this is white, the white's going to go on top, but I'm going in the direction of the fur, okay? And that's really important. The key bit when you are rendering any sort of animal fur is that you follow the direction, because the direction of the fur is defined by the bone structure and the muscle structure underneath. So this chap here has obviously a pointy skull. You've probably all seen on nature programs what the fox skull looks like. I'm also going to put just a, you see I'm just sweeping the brush over here. So if we look at the reference image here, can you see this little oval area here has I guess a smattering of those brown hairs in it. So I'm going to put that on there. I'm just going to sweep that over there, because when I come to put the whites on there, it's going to change that colour. It's a bit like when you see an image on TV. It's obviously made up of, you know, lots of little pixels and things. It's not actually an image, is it? So same thing happens when you put layers of paint on top. Now I'm just going to go down here and just down the side and under his eye. There we go. So you can get all sorts of shapes out of this brush as you're using it. Now you see how this is drying already, so it's starting to go rock hard, which is okay, that's fine, that's what we want. Let's just go up there a little bit. So I'm just seeing where I am. I've picked up a little bit of the darker orange that I mixed just off to the side, just to go either side of the ears, and that little bit down there as well. Okay. This bit here is much lighter colour, so I'm actually going to come back to that when I've finished doing a bit more of this over here. So you can start down with the tail. This bit here this is the bit where his tail is just coming out of the body. What you can't see, because there's a big weed in the way, is there's just the hint of his back leg there. But I'm not worried too much about this, because in the finished piece he's hidden in undergrowth really. Now I'm also going to go all the way up there, but I did it with a very light stroke. So when you look at his tail's got these undertones of orange on here, and he's then got these black bits of fur in, and this has got undertones of orange as well. But again, this is a bit like all of his ruff. It's all got little tiny bits in there of orange, but it's going to get covered in white a little bit later on. So I'm giving myself something that I call space to paint. Right, so this is his leg. So what I mean by space to paint is that this colouring is going to be created by all the different layers really coming through. Now can you see there's a slight difference here? Because I went dark under here, this is actually giving me already a slightly different layer. Now you just have to watch what we're doing here, because when you look at his back leg, because it's all curled up like it is, we've got this massive bone, so across here and down here, and then the hip bone, and then here we've got a whole mass of muscle that allows him to run away from the farmer when he's been nicking eggs. So this has got fur going every which way. You can see that by the white that's on there, and it's the white that's going to give us that definition. But I'm going to make sure that part of the fur just here, can you see it all starts to stand up here? So our brush strokes are going to start to stand up. Now it might seem strange because this is an underpainting, but it all adds to the realism. Right, we're going to come back here now, so we're coming downwards. Crikey, it's like being a fox hairdresser, isn't it? So you pick up a bit more paint, but we're going to come downwards like this, because his hair or his fur is all pointing downwards, and it's actually following his muscles under there. You can already see we're beginning to get something that resembles, probably a bad hair day, but we're getting something that resembles the fact that he's got movement in that fur there. Okay, so I am just going to swap brushes, and let's add a little bit of this and add a bit more white to this, because I just want to lighten up a couple of those areas. So I've got, what have I got? Pure white there. That's the one I'm using at the moment. And as you can see, not much, because I don't want too much on there, but I am going to go back in here and start adding this little bit. I'm not too worried about this, but the fur here, the fur on the nose, I don't know how closely you can see that on the reference image, but that is it. If you've ever stroked a dog's nose or a cat's nose, just about here, it's like really, really short fur. So all you want are tiny little stabbing motions, almost like you're, you know, teasing that paint in to fill in that area. We will come back to this little bit here. You can just about see, remember I talked about the mauve colour? We're going to use that, which were just here above the snout, just above the wet nose of the fox. It's almost like bald, so it's skin that's showing through basically. So that's the bit that we're going to use the mauve for on the nose, but for now that can go on top of this. I'm paying attention to this sort of shape that's up here, so it's almost like I don't know what you'd call that, but it's it raises up to here, and then it's got, oops, it goes across the snout down here. So we just want to make sure that shape is the same. So it's slightly lighter. We've got slightly lighter bits under here. So we're starting to bring things together a little bit. One of the things I would say to you, you can see here exactly what's happening to that. So lift it away from your paper, because if you are painting with white paper behind it, it looks fantastic until you lift it away from the paper. And this is what I'd expect to see at this stage. It looks, you can see all the brush strokes in it. Those brush strokes are going to go away as we get paint on, but you can also see the gaps, or any gaps that we've got in there, which we're looking to fill in. We haven't got to the white yet, so there's bound to be gaps. So periodically lift it away. Also, if I guess this is obvious, but I always forget to say it, if you're painting anything that's white, then put black paper behind it so that it's easier for you to see. It's a lot more information that it's going to give you if you're on black paper when you've got white stuff here. Right, I'm just going to add a few bits into this for the side of the ear. I know this is white, but it's almost like you get the coverage on the glass, then you can start to build the layers. So this is slightly lighter. Let's get a bit more white in here. I don't know why I'm reaching over there. I want to bring the white to me. So I'm using the layering mix almost like you would use water to mix your paints with, just dipping in as I need it. He's also got a little light bit there, a little light bit here. We've got this little bit down here where his foot is. It's just a little bit lighter. And a highlight just on his leg. So we're going to put a little bit of white stuff in there, creamy stuff in there. Little highlight up. Oh, we forgot to fill that in. Look, need to sort that out in a minute. So I'm really aiming to get kind of base colour all over the glass, so I can then start adding detail in. So I think we're good there. We're going to add some of the white in. So I haven't bothered cleaning my brush here. I'm actually going to mix some white into that. I want a fair amount. There we go. So this is going to give me what I call the space to work. So this is not white here. Now, I don't know if we've talked about these, but these little areas here, as soon as you look at that, a lot of people will say he's got a white ruff. He hasn't. So if I was going to actually do that, it's more like almost like a purple, like a warm grey purple that we're using in there. If I want the colours on here, like this colour, then simply I can paint next to it, and you can see that's far too light. So if I'm going to colour match that, I'm going to need to add some red into there, some mauve into there, and get closer to the colour. So these little things, again in the ebook we talk about how we use these, but one of the things about doing realistic painting is getting A, the right shapes, and B, the right colour. So using these is ideal way of getting the right colour onto here. I have to say I have lightened up my fox because I wanted him to be quite vibrant, so I've had a little bit of artistic license, but generally you want to be making sure that your colours are going to match. So I'm going to lighten this a little bit up because this is pretty much dried up here, and I'm still going in the same direction as the fur's going. Just to get some texture into the fur here for this underpainting, and to get that coverage on there, get those layers on there. Tiny little bit of harvest right on the edge of that. A little bit of this mix that I've got here. So I'm dipping into this mix and kind of making myself various tones of what I can see here. And we're starting to pull this all together. So lighten these up a little bit. We can go back in here with glazes a little bit later on as well, once we've got detail in and we want to just push colours back or darken them or add a shadow here, a shadow there. We can go in and put some glazes on this. So again, I'm following the direction I want to go, just to make that a little bit lighter. What else have I got here? You can see I'm losing the eye a little bit here, which is fine, because we need to come back and do that. Okay. So I'm just going to add some of the texture into here. I should be singing to you or something, shouldn't I? I get carried away when I'm doing this, so if I go quiet, my apologies. Again, you don't have to be kind of as detailed as I am. That's just my style. That's just the way I like to do things. So you could be more painterly if you prefer. I just like the detail of this. Okay, I'm just going to wash my brush out and add some white onto here. So let's get some white. So I'm mixing up the pure white. And I'm also going to take, actually I might just take a tiniest bit. And when I say tiniest bit, that's what I mean, this amount of black. And I'm also just going to go to one corner of it here. You can see how it's changed it. But the reason I'm doing that is when we go up here and we start to look at how dark this area is, you can see that's nowhere near the colour that we've got on here. So go with our mauve, take a little bit of that and make it a bit more purpley. There's a beautiful colour in Derwent pencil range called Carmine, Burnt Carmine, and it's the exact colour that we're looking for this. It's like a purpley grey, and I always search for that every time I'm doing a pastel drawing. Amazing how colours stick in your mind, really. That one does, all the time. So you can see we've changed this. Oh, we still need to be, some of that is probably a magenta cast from the printer as well. But we still need to be a bit darker in here. But it's a nice colour. Whoop, it's a bit too much. It's a nice colour to have. Probably gone a bit too dark there. And to use, because it warms up the fur, and it gives you what we call this space to work. Now, if you go straight in with white, what are you going to do when it comes to the highlights? So this is what we mean when we're talking about space to work, and this is why it's important to look at this. So we're getting closer in terms of tone. I actually don't want it that pink, so I am going to use it that sort of colour. And for this ruff that we've got here, that the fox has got, we're going to use this as the underpainting colour, because when I then go on top of that with the white, it's going to really pop, and it's actually going to show you all of this lovely texture that you would normally see in the fox fur underneath. I actually want a bit more black into a little bit of this, and we're going to start blending that we did here. That needs to be much darker there, back into this fur over here. And then once we've done all our what we would call white areas, we are ready to get onto the next layer of detail. So I'm just going to finish doing this, and then we can show you what we've done and what we're ready to do next. So this, the fur here is much longer. It needs to be a bit more fluid, and it's just going to flick up some of these little bits over here, so it's got some colour going into there. Okay, I think the ear as well, we'll use this colour, and we'll put some mauve over the top of that bit. So that's that real dark bit that we've got in there. You see it's starting to come together now that we're getting rid of the gaps that are in here. So this area here, I'm going to lighten it up slightly. A bit more white. So this is much whiter on his muzzle, but I'm going to go in with this because I want to be able to put some shadow into it later on. So we go right down to the bottom, under his nose. I'll come on the other side, but that needs to be much whiter. And we'll just take this right the way up to join in with the rest of the fur up here. So this is much whiter, and you can see that it gives more definition there. But if I put this grey on as a base colour, we can create that depth as we go. And then this little, where the edge of the leg is where all that fur stands up. And that is a little tuft of white that he's got there. So it's beginning to look like he might resemble a fox later on. A little bit that I've just realised we've missed here of this bit, which is much more orangey, so I'm just going to add a bit more orange in here. Finish this bit. This is his front leg. So it's in shadow, but you can really see the orangey undertones of his fur. Okay. Last little bits there. So this is what I would call the first pass of the underpainting. The next bit that we're going to do is that second layer, and that second layer, once this is dried, is going to be more detail. So as each layer develops, we get more detail. I think we need to revisit the eyes and get some colour in on the eyes. And then we're going to do the nose and the ears while the rest of this is drying. So remember we did the blackest blacks. We've got a little bit of paint that's gone over those, and we can just do a little bit of redefinition. So I've gone to my smallest brush here, just going around with his eyeliner. There we are. Let's go right down the middle of that. This one has got lost a little bit. I'm just going to redefine that eye around there. When they get lost and you've actually got paint over the top, it's quite entertaining because there's all sorts of expressions that you get on the old fox as you go. Now don't go too far with the black, because although it looks dark up there, it's not black, it's actually shadow in the fur. So we're going to come back to that with some glazes and do that. So let's look at the nose. Looks a little bit more black there. So the nose, well, the nostrils are kind of like lost edges. So again, it's another term that we use for areas in a painting that have just disappeared into nothingness. But they're lost because it's all black. I'm kind of, there's a little bit of light on this, so I'm kind of moving my head to try and see them. But there's two nostrils here. So if I painted them on here, obviously this is dry black and wet black on top, so it's all going to come out the same. But if you imagine there's two nostrils there on the fox, so that's kind of what you'd see there. We don't see that in this particular picture simply because it's all lost in shadows, but we do see, if you're able to see what I'm looking at here, ever so slightly there's a tiny little highlight here and one here that I can just about see where the light's just catching the bottom of the nostril. So we'll wait for this to dry and we will put that in, I'm going to go down here and just redefine the mouth, because he looks like he's not quite smiling. He's not happy he's been woken up. There should be some white underneath that, so that gives me the idea that the white needs to go a bit further under there as well. So we're being a little bit more detailed when we're doing these areas, because we're starting from here on in to develop a little bit more detail on it, because at the moment it's just bits of colour that have been joined together. We now need to blend that and bring it all together. So this bit up here we did earlier on when we did our blackest blacks. I'm just going to make sure that where we have got the blackest blacks, we've now got that coverage. Not too much that we need there. And there's one or two little black dots that he's got on there. While I've got the black, I might as well strengthen these areas, but what we're going to do now is to actually paint in the ears, the eyes and the nose. So I'm just going to use this black up, strengthening this, and then I'm going to wash out the brush and we'll start with the ears. So I'm using this small brush purely because I want to control where I'm obviously putting the paint on here. And you can see as you start to do some of this definition, the edges are less blurry, whereas these are just broad old strokes. We're starting to get edges that are much more defined. So like down here, some nice sharp edges down by the side of his mouth. And again, that will all add to your painting. So you're paying really attention to whether it's sharp edge, soft edge, is it a contrast in colour, is it a contrast in shape? So all of this stuff you're taking in as you're doing this. Okay, I'm going to switch to this brush, which was the 3-0 brush. I'm going to mix some mauve. So this was the UGC colour, the Unique Glass Colours colour. Look at that, it's beautiful, isn't it? I'm keeping that black because I may want to darken this down just a touch. Now, there's two ways of darkening things down. You can either add the opposite in it. So if you were adding, if you looked at red and green, for instance, green is opposite red on the colour wheel. If you add green into red, eventually you'll get to a mid-grey and you should come out the other side. That's the theory of mixing colour. Obviously a lot of people just add black to something, and sometimes that can change things. You have to just be careful what you're mixing together when it comes to obviously glass enamel. But the thing I like to do is use a weaker solution of something and layer it on top. So with this, I'm going to keep this mauve, the basic mauve colour, and I'm going to go in here. So it's quite thick. So you want to make sure you've got enough, because essentially what you're doing is making that glass suspend in the layering mix. And you want to go in here and make sure that you've got a decent coverage. Now it's a bit too bright. When you look at this and you look at this, it's too bright to begin with. So I will go over that with a glaze, so like a weak solution of something that's a slightly darker colour. And that will keep the colour that's underneath, but it will allow me to see just a slight change in tint, tone or shade or whatever it is that you're wanting to try and change. So because we've got that grey underneath, it's already changing colour slightly. But can you see the fox is now beginning to look like, oh, actually that might be real, because he has got little pink ears there now. So we're starting to change this detail. This little bit here, do you remember we talked about this bit? This area here, just a little triangle above his nose. He's just got that skin. So we're just adding a little bit of that on top of there. Now, I've left this bit here on the top of his nose. So going back to what we said about the nose, we need a little highlight in the bottom, but we need this highlight on top as well. And the highlight on top, if we actually look at it, it's, in this case, it's more like blue, isn't it? So when you look at that, it's almost like a bright blue that you've got on top of there. So we could mix some of that. Let's just have a look, see if we've got some blue up there. Ooh. I should have got that down before we started. I'm going to get my lovely cameraman to find me some blue while we're waiting. And I'm going to mix a little bit of black into here. Thank you very much. So it's a sky blue that we've got, but we are actually going to go into this black here and use that to make like a blue grey, and that blue grey is going in here. Need a little bit more black actually. Don't need much more blue, but I need more black. We'll lighten that up a little bit as well. So we can make a nice sort of bluey grey. And just dot that in. And we'll come back to that because it needs to dry a little bit so that we can blend those together. And then once those are completely dry, we're going to come back to that and put a highlight in that nose. So it's all about doing a little bit, moving on, wait until it's dry. It's not worth trying to force paint on top of it because you just lift and push off in a different direction. Okay, so let's start with the eyes. So I'm going to go mandarin here. And the eyes are done again in, as is everything, several layers. So we've got some mandarin, and you can see that is, oh, just a glorious colour. Look at that. That's a real foxy eye, isn't it? And a tiniest touch of flame orange to warm it up a bit. Now, again, we're going to look at the reference image here because when you look at the eye, around the edges of that, it's kind of much more orangey, much more yellowy than it is right around the pupil in the middle. So we've drawn the pupils in, but we are going to paint the eye in this one colour for the moment. We're going to go back in with glazes later on, just to darken around the pupil to get that sort of iris effect where it's got that beautiful rich brown in there. So back into here, you need to make sure you've got some lovely thick paint on here. The other reason we're going to go back into it later on is, of course, this is a sphere. It's not just a flat plane that you're painting here. And so little foxy bloke here has got this muscle, this bit here. When he frowns, like I'm frowning, you get a shadow that comes over the top of your eye. And he's got a little bit of that shadow over the top of his eye. And we need to add that in. We can't do it until this is dried. So we're going to put the colour for the actual eye in here. Doesn't matter if you go over the black of the pupil because, you know, we're going to re-emphasise those a little bit later on. And we're also going to look at the highlights that are in here. And it's the highlight. Once you start getting the highlight in, look at that, the difference I've just put my finger in that, that's no good, is it? The difference once you start getting colour on the eye in here. So we're just gonna go back in here, decent amount of colour. It's almost like I'm pushing the colour into the space just to make sure it completely covers really nice and thickly. Now these are going to look a little bit flat at the moment because there's no highlight in them. And the thing that you need people to see when they look at this is the fact that the eye is wet and that it's round, it's not just a flat plane that's in there. And you do that by adding your highlights in and your shadows in once this is dry. So we've got those little bits in there, quite happy with that. So he's almost able to see us at the moment. I think that might be sufficiently dry at the bottom just to put a little highlight in. So I've got a little bit of the white there, mix that in with the grey. I don't want this too thick. So that is just about here and about here. And again, the other thing I can see is a slight highlight just down the middle. I might subdue these and push them back a little bit once we start on the glazes, because they're a little bit bright for me at the moment, excuse me. And while I've got a little bit of black, I'm just going to mix myself a grey. It's quite a cold grey actually, just for this bottom jawline under here. There we go. It's a bit more white. Add that in. Okay, I think I'm fairly happy with that, apart from the fact that I stuck my finger right in the mauve on his ear, so let's just fix that. So this bit here, I just stuck my finger in, which is no good, is it? Let's just mix a bit thicker paint. There we go. Lovely. So I'm going to clean my brushes. I'm going to just carry on doing what we've talked about here, but I'm going to now start making it more detailed as I go. So this is all about getting the coverage. This next part here, we can start to use some medium as well. So I am going to just put myself a little couple of drops of medium here, just to thin out some of that paint as I start to go over. So I've just got a 1-to-1 mix now of layering mix. So a little bit of that, a little bit of that, layering mix and medium. And I'm going to start making myself similar colours to what we had, but closer now to the colours that we've got in here for the darker areas. So I'm going to go with the red brown and the flame orange. I'm probably going to lighten that a little bit with some mandarin. So that's really quite vibrant. That's lovely. Now, if you want a nice point on your brush as you go, you just want to twist it in the paint and pick up a nice point on your brush. So I'm going to start down here and I start to work on these areas, and you can see where we've now got the ability when we start to, I've got by the way a 3-0 brush here in case you're wondering. When we start to work on this, we're now paying attention to that shape, and we want to make this a rounded shape. So towards the back of it here on this paw that we're looking at here, it's actually got a bit of a lost edge. It just disappears into the shadows. So we're going to do that when we start to put shadows on top. But for now, I'm strengthening this colour. I'm going to make sure that we've picked up the right. So I've just corrected that jawline a little bit. This is a little bit thicker paint. We can start to add this on here, and we can start to blend some of these areas together. So tiny little marks that I'm making here, but I'm just making sure I've got my next layer, and I'm making sure I'm following the direction of the fur. So as we start to come up here, we're going up this way, right underneath here, and this all gets lost in the shadows now underneath here. Still not quite dry enough on this one because it's moving some of this paint. That's fine, we can add some of that darkness back in. This here, this back leg that we've got here, it's got a nice defined line down here, and this white area is a highlight that's being picked up where the sun's shining on him. And then I can only assume that that carries on down there. It's just covered with a little leaf there. So we're going to carry on in this vein. I'm going to pick up different areas, pay attention to the colours, pay attention to what we've got. I'm going to start adding a little bit of dark into here to darken this up. Just pay attention to the shapes that we've got here. And you see we start blending together. Where these are quite rough and you go quite severely from some of the white areas and dark areas, I'm now being more refined about this as we add this layer in, and more refined about the shapes that I'm making as well. A little bit darker area here. You'd still be quite quick about how you do it. Oops. You just got to make sure that you know what your shapes are, what you're looking at here. A little bit of that blue-black I've picked up here to start to bring this darker area in. It needs to be way darker than this, but I'm going to do it by degrees as opposed to, you know, doing it all at once. And we can darken it up as we start to add glazes on here later on. There's my dark brown. I think I'll add a bit of dark brown in for this leg. So I'm going to show you this little bit, and then I will crack on and do this, and we'll come back and see what the results of doing this layer are. So a little bit of dark brown we've got in going on in here, and a little bit of red brown just to brighten it up. There we are. So this bit we talked about earlier on is part of the creases where he's got his little leg folded up. Always in the direction of the fur. And pick up a couple of colours together on the brush, and you can start to get this sort of brindled fur colour that he's got here. So you might be surprised to know that this is not the most detailed brush. You don't really need it, you just need to make sure that you're you know, following the direction at this stage. Now this is all about mark making, really. So when I'm doing this, just so that you know, when we're doing fur, we're kind of doing these stabbing motions like this, but you need to go over the top of it in places like this. Yeah. If you do this, it kind of looks all right, but can you see how much better that looks, because you've got a mixture of marks when you're doing the mark making to create that fur. So don't just go in one direction, make sure that you're perhaps just twisting your brush, maybe it goes the other way, maybe there's a bit of a parting that goes down there, so your fur goes in a different direction. But you can see that by adjusting the angle of your brush and adjusting the marks that you make, you can actually, it's good to practice mark making and see what kind of marks you can actually get, you know, just by using one particular brush. You don't have to have a whole ream of brushes to be able to do this. So I've added a bit of black. I'm going back over some of these areas here, doing this kind of situation to get some of that detail in. Or you also might find it's easier to squint sometimes to actually see better, which sounds odd, but it actually does work. Stand back from your painting as well every now and again, have a little look, make sure that you're happy with your progress, and sometimes you've just got to stand back to be able to see maybe areas that need a little bit of correction. So I'm going to carry on doing this, and I'm going to get into the stage where we're ready to do the next layer of detail. Right, you join us back with the fox. I've done a little bit more work on here, adding some more definition into it. The next phase, we can start using this. This is just normal medium. And what I want to do here is to start with the eyes and add that sort of glazing that we talked about. So I'm using no layering mix at this point, I'm just using the medium. Can you see how much paint I've got? Not very much at all. Put that against the white, you can probably see. Tiny amount of paint, even more layering mix to it. So this is a really, if I put that on there, you can see the strength of that. Yeah, it's not very strong at all. So it's more mix, less paint really. But what that'll do, I have discovered it acts like a glaze. So on here, where we did the eyes with the mandarin and with a touch of white in there, right round the edge of the eye here, when you get the eye, the pupil, not the eye, around the edge of the pupil, you look here, you can see the iris is slightly different colour, a bit like ours really. It's a little bit browner. And when you start to use this, you can use this for all sorts of applications. You can use it across the top just to create that little shadow if you want. Now this has actually got a little bit of a shadow around the edge here. I'm going to add a little bit more in just to go, oops, a bit too much there. You can always just mix off to the side of it and take more of that in if you want to. I'm just going to put a little bit more round the pupil just to darken it a little bit. You can dot it in if you want. Just make it look more realistic. But can you see how much more menacing his eyes look when you start to darken that little bit up, and when we put that little shadow underneath there? Now this is great for the eyes, but this is also what we're going to start to use. I'll come back to this, but this is what we're going to start to use in here to put these shadows in. Yeah, so stick with the eyes for now. So we can see that he's now looking a bit more like this. I think we need to just do a little bit of work on the pupils and the outline as well. So while I had the mix for the nose shadow, you can see it's dried now, it's much lighter here. I'm going to go in and change that shape ever so slightly. This up here shows me that little, very slight, bit like on the nose, very slight highlight on the lower rim of his eyes. So I'm going back. I'm still going to use just medium for this because the layers have dried and we can go on top of it now. So I'm going in with the black, and I'm going to just make sure that we bring this lid around here. So it's fine as it is. There's a little bit of shadow that he's got there, and we just round that out slightly. Just round that ever so slightly on the top. We're going to look at the pupil, and that is a little bit larger there, and this bit in the corner, he's got quite a shadow going on there, and quite this is where the tear ducts are in the corner, just like ours, and you end up with a stain. I'm sure it's the same, most dogs and cats, you end up with a sort of stain down there as the eye runs, and I'm going to put that under there. This bit here, and coming down, and there's where right in the corner of your eye you get that little bump, and on these animals it's usually where the nictating membrane is, like the third eyelid that you get on cats and dogs and things like that. And it's that little bit in the corner. So that is actually highlighted. I'm going to go back round here, but keep some of that grey for that little highlight that's there. There we go. Pupil slightly larger, and this one is about the same. There we go. So he's got better makeup on now around his eyes. Let's just make sure that top one is the shape we want it to be. There we go. Looks much better. Just have that shape coming down there. So you can see we've got much better detail for his eyes. Just going to let that dry for a little bit. I'm going up to the ear, and I'm going to take much more of the medium and mix it with this sort of browny black that I've got up here. And when you look here, this is this sort of area which is kind of skin with a tiny little bit of hair on there. I'm going to dot that in because it's a bit like that sort of scaly skin that you see with a scant coating of hair in the inside of the ear. But what it does do is it serves to give shape to the ear. And you remember we put this mauve on top of here. And we just need to come back down here, darken some of these areas up. So this was a real darker area, if you remember, which are kind of covered up. So I'm just going to grab that back. There's a little bit just here. a little bit more mix, very, very light sort of glaze that goes on top. So you don't fundamentally change, oh, excuse me, you don't change that much of the colour. You do change the tone of what you've got there. I'm just going to go with a bit more definition here. So this is just where it's got that little bit of black hair just down the side there. And you see immediately we've now added more detail. So let's go on the other side and let's just take that black area, which is actually a little black mark on the skin. A little bit of grey hair underneath there. We're going to do the same thing again. So where we've got this mauve bit here, it's just a little bit darker. We're going to mottle that in. That's probably a good description, isn't it? Some sort of mottled skin that he's got there. I'm going to darken that slightly. Now you can spend more time obviously observing and doing these bits, but for the video I think this is probably going to serve us well. There's a little bit under there that he needs a little bit of mottling there as well. There we go, so much more detail now. Okay, I think we'll go back to the nose, just revisit that before we finish off our eyes. So I'm going to get more black. And I'm just going to use that sort of stippling effect that I did, because actually when you look at the nose in real life, that skin that you get on a dog's nose is sort of dimpled. So for this bit, you notice that, remember I put those highlights in, I'm going to try and keep those highlights there. That's more solid and that's less so. You've got that little dimply bit in the middle. That's where his nostrils are here. So we've got several layers now on this. I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to take a lot more of the layering mix, so this is much thinner. You can see exactly what we've got on there. Very, very weak colour. But what it will do here is allow us to just break that shadow up just a little bit, and also blend this into this little bit of skin here. Okay, can you see what I meant when I said about knocking colours back or sort of subduing them a little bit? This is exactly what's happened here. So it was really bright, too bright. By using a glaze on top of it, we've been able to just change it sufficiently to keep that highlight, but push it back and make it look more like we've got it up here. And we're going to do that to the rest of it. One of the biggest things that I love to do, and I'm going to do this with a little bit of layering mix, is the highlight in the eye. Make sure you've got a clean brush when you do this. Let's get rid of all of that on there. So I'm going to show you that before we move on to putting detail in the fur. So we want a really nice thick mixture here for highlight. This is not a glaze situation, this is a nice thick mixture, because don't forget we're going to cover that black anyway. So let's talk about highlights. So the eye is a wet surface, and what it's doing is reflecting what's around it. So if it's got blue sky, your highlight's most likely going to be blue. This one here, I'm guessing that the photographer may have had some sort of light setup. I'm not sure because it is quite white. It's possibly, if we were able to zoom in, and I normally like to work from photos on my laptop so I can zoom in to see what's there, but if we were to zoom in, the likelihood is it was a really sunny day, and so it shows you like just a round ball of sun and maybe some clouds on it. So quite often you get blue and white highlights, but what we're going to do here is look at the shape of it, and you can see this one is a little round blob with some light off to the side, so I'm guessing it was sun with a cloudy sky. So this one here, not a big cloudy sky, you know, like the fluffy clouds that you get, it's got a little highlight that goes off over this side like that. And this here has got quite a big old highlight in there. It goes off that way. And it makes a massive difference to the eyes when you start to get these highlights in. This one here, you may be able to see, you may not, has also got a little highlight just there and just here that's stronger than that blue that I put in. So we're just going to add that little highlight in there. And there's a tiny little one just down here as well. Okay, so that is going to work for me. I may well come back in here a little bit later before I stick it in the kiln and just add a tiny bit extra just to make sure we've got the right highlight. Okay, so we're happy with that. So next bit we're going to do is to start on refining the fur. So I'm going to look at the colour I've got here, red brown. There's a more orangey brown, I think, that we need here. A little bit of mandarin in here. There we go. That's more like it. It's worth spending the time getting your colours where you want them, and then you can use your medium to just dilute them to washes or glazes. I'm going to put a little bit of medium over here. You can tell the difference obviously because this is a much clearer thing than the layering mix. You can always test how strong that is on here and then just wipe it off to see what you've got. So this is quite a vibrant one, but it's still going to do the job for what we want. I think we're going to go in here and we're just going to take this little shape that we've got here, all this little area, and make it a little bit more, a little bit darker. And again, I'm using this zero brush here so that we are able to just sort of be as detailed as possible. Now, remember this bit we talked about here? This is the area just above the eye where he's got that little muscle. So that's in shadow under there. And he's also got a little white bit there, which we'll come back to, but this needs to be a little bit darker just there. So again, much like we did before, we're going to start with a base colour, change what we see here, and then we can always go in and darken up with a little bit more shadow. So I'm not obscuring the paint I've got underneath because this is a weaker mix. It's actually enhancing the paint underneath, and it also allows me to leave areas of the paint underneath so that we can actually see some of it in between the brush strokes that I'm putting on here. So I've gone all the way around that little bit. So again, we're just paying attention to the shapes that we've got here. Just sit back, have a quick look, make sure that it's heading in the right direction. I'm just going to come down here. Now you can see here, this is quite a light piece here, but can you see what's happening? It suddenly looks like I've changed colour on the brush, and actually I haven't. All I've done is I'm starting to put this glaze over a lighter base. I'm starting to go over the grey there, and you can see it really does enhance what's there. Don't change it too much. So I'm going to start working into some of that white there so that the edges blend a little bit. And you can see now that that detail is starting to come together. I'm just going to take a little black into this just to darken it up somewhat and get some of this darker glaze here, just to finish this little area, because that is much darker in there. Where we've got that shadow, and we've got a little darker bits up here as well. You've got that little frown line going on there, look. And just wipe your brush off if you need to. I'm going to go back over this side, finish this bit. Tiny little marks. This is almost like that I mentioned earlier on, that sort of brindled look that you get just because you've got a few dashes of brown in here. And the face is the key thing, because that's the focal point of what we're looking at. So spend the time on the face. This bit we're still going to spend time on, but it's not as defined because this is where the focus is on this image. So these get a little bit longer, the brush strokes get a little bit longer here. I'm not going to go too mad because this goes into this lighter area here, but there are one or two of these. We're going to come back over this with white, but there are one or two of the dark areas in here. I'm going to kind of blend that eyelid up a little bit. And the more time you do this, the more time you spend on this, the more you'll get a deeper depth of colour, obviously, because you're putting more layers on. So I'm coming back over this little bit here, starting to mix together nicely. But we're starting to blend all of these areas that just looked like they were, you know, separate areas. They're now beginning to come together. A bit longer strokes here because in the ear you get those long tufts of fur. A little bit darker brown, I think. So we're just going to go in with some of the darker bits, a bit darker still, I think. I'm mixing that with a little bit of medium and a tiny bit of black. Just pop that over there for a minute so that I don't make that too dark. So these are the longer bits that are coming up over here. a little bit behind there. You can see how it soon starts to come together. So while I've got this on my brush, I'm going to just add the odd one or two long bits that are in here. And then go back to working on the face. So I was at this point, wasn't I? So just next to the ear there's quite a defined point. Just this bit here that we're looking at. There's a defined point just behind there. And again, this is where your sharp and soft edges are coming into play. So that then shows you that that does need to be lighter. So we'll put some white on that. But it starts to, you know, that piece of cartilage that you have there on the side of the ear as it joins into the top of the head, starts to pick that up. Gosh, you'll never look at a fox the same way again, will you? You can see we're getting more detail. Right, so he's got a bit of a Mohican going on. Most foxes have in the middle. So when you look at this, it goes right up to a point just here, which is why when you talk to draw foxes, you draw a big triangle for the middle bit here. So I'm going to steady that with my little finger, and I'm just going to make a suggestion of that little bit here. Now this is where all of this underpainting comes into play. You can see doing this mark making again. You can see we're leaving some of that space underneath. This is that space to paint we talk about. So we're leaving some of that colour showing through, but we're now getting some of this, these darker, and the darker bits are just simply the shadows actually between little clumps of fur. A little bit up here, up that ear. And this is quite distinctive because it kind of crisscrosses all the way up. So do a little crisscross mark making all the way up there. And similar on this side. Now even without painting this, I've done nothing to this here, but just by creating that detail, your eye is tuning into the fact that you've really got the detail of the fox there, as opposed to, you know, well, this dodgy bit over here and then all the detail over here. So it's amazing how you can direct the eye in a painting. Right, I'm going to come over this side, do a similar thing. So we had all of that there. So I'm barely stroking the surface when I'm doing this, just adding these little marks into it and just using this glaze that we've talked about. So it's mainly medium. And this here, you see he's got two little sort of half moon shapes here, and that is the eye socket, so all the way around there, but it blends into the fur that's underneath it. So he's got that eye socket bit there. And he's got the other bit going over here. And that's giving him that sort of definition on his face. The more you do this, the more layers you get, the more depth you get. And you'll just notice, as I'm doing, as you go back to different parts of it, that just now needs to be a little bit darker. So from where we started with a really rough coverage, we're now getting to something that is really quite beautifully detailed. And we've still got all this grey hair that we need to cover with the white as well, so still got quite a bit of work to do on that. but we're getting there. Now I'm pulling this down into this, and it's giving you that effect that he's got the, you know, quite long fur there. He's looking all right. A little bit deeper. Now the thing about this is if we lift that, you remember we lifted that earlier on, you can start to see, well, there is no space there and there's no light through it. There's a little bit here, so we can add more depth onto that. But as you can see, we've now got coverage on here as opposed to gaps on there, which is what we want. So let's just add a little bit more colour around here. So this is quite strong. It's just the colour I mixed, not as much medium. And we're going crisscross over the top. So like this kind of mark. Now mine's possibly a little bit more vibrant than the fox on here because that's just how I want my piece to come out. Okay, I think that's enough on the face for the minute. I'm just going to go back over to this side, and I've used a very weak glaze of the red brown here, and I'm just going to darken these bits a little bit on top of that. You can see it's beginning to come together on this side now. Where's my mix? There we go. So I'm going to put a tiny bit of black and some of the red brown and the dark brown in here, so we're mixing quite a dark glaze. And I want to really strengthen this area here because it's really quite dark. I've moved to a 3-0 brush. This is really, again, a lost area here, lost shadow that we don't see too much of because it's curled right underneath him. So I'm not bothered too much about the detail, but this bit, oh, need a bit more black. Make this darker. This bit here I do want to define because it's that transition between this bit that's got a highlight and then this really dark element under here. Let's just darken this up a little bit. And these are all the depths of little bits of tufty fur that we see. This is really quite a quick one. And also this bit here is really dark. So I want to make sure that that is a much deeper wash, a deeper glaze on there. So we don't lose that definition of that leg. We want to still keep that there. We're going to come right back in here like we did earlier on. That's quite light along there. And at the back, it almost gets lost into that really dark shadow. I'm just going to bring that a little bit further into here. So that comes out into a highlight there. And there's some tiny bits just come back into here. So that's quite dark. Almost black down here. darken it up just a touch more. And then this bit here, oops, is quite lost. So we just kind of try and make sure that that blends into this bit here. It's almost like that leg's coming out of the darkness. We can go back up to there. This is all quite light. There's a few tufty bits in here. And this is quite a dark area where that crease is, where the tail just comes out. Lovely jubbly. Just coming back up here. I'm going to define that a little bit more than it is actually on the picture, just to make it look like he is really in the depths of the undergrowth. And then I'm just going to, because I've got the same old colour here, I'm just going to warm this up slightly. And I'm going to put a few dark areas before I get the white out. So there's a big old clump there, and there's one or two little bits here. Marvellous. It can be quite deceiving just here, because that doesn't look black anymore because it's dried. So when you look on the original, I am actually darkening this, but when you look on the original, don't get too worried. On the original, on the finished item, don't forget that that will be black, and these areas will actually be jet black. That's just the nature of the way that the enamel dries. Now again, this bit is really undefined down here because it's going to be hidden. It's hidden in the shrubbery. On the piece that I actually do, that is a finished piece, it will be all hidden in undergrowth anyway. I'm going to do it slightly differently to the last one that I did, but it will be hidden under there. Okay, so all this is just beginning to dry. Put the last dark bits on here. This is a bit stronger colour. There we go. Maybe a couple of bits in there. Right, I'm going to wash my brush, and I'm going to wash the palette as well. So you can see this comes off really easily, even the stuff that's dried. It's just a water wipe that I've got here. But I'm going to make sure this is completely washed off. And I'm just going to dry it. There we are. Wash the brush. And now we can go back. Let's get some medium. There we go. And we are going to mix ourselves some white. So this is pure white that we've got down here. It's the only time that I'm going to use the pure white. So up until now, you can see it's quite a hefty mix that we've got in here as well. But now we can use this medium over the top of the layering mix without worrying that it's going to come off or it's going to shift the paint or anything. Okay. I'm going to twist this to a point and let's see what we've got here. So these little bits over here, I need to just pull those out ever so slightly. I need that to be a bit thicker. You just test it on there, make sure it's the thickness that you want. There we go. So now we can work on the top of this. Now you can see what's happening here because we've got grey underneath. I'm just going to swap brushes, so I want that to be a bit finer. So I'm just going back to my 0 brush. Because we've got black here, we've got grey here, we can now start to pull some of these little hairs over the top. And it starts to give you the impression that you've got much more finer fur on there. And we're doing this, this little crisscross that we talked about earlier on, so that hairs are going in all sorts of directions. But this is the room to work we talked about. You've actually got this layer coming up on here now. It's giving you the effect that you've got white fur with gaps underneath and shadows underneath and all sorts of stuff. And it's also going to allow you to blend all this together. This is going to look odd because I haven't quite gone to the edge of where I drew the outline, so that's all going to burn off, which will be absolutely fine. Now the other thing, of course, is that if you are going to put a background on your piece, as most people are going to, and what I find useful to do is to actually paint the sky and the outline in right up to the edge, because normally I use powders and everything else to create my full background. But before I do that, I will actually just paint in up to the edge, so I don't lose that definition on the fur. And it means that I don't have to, you know, when I'm sifting powder on it, I'm not in danger of going over the painting that I've done. So you can now see this is looking much more full because I've got this colour underneath it, whereas if I just put white, there'd be nowhere to go. There's no shadows, no drama, nothing. But now it looks like he's got a proper old ruff on there. I'm just going to put a bit more white in there. This is the only time I'm, as I said, that I'm using, pardon when I did the highlights, the only time that I'm actually going in there with pure white on top. And I still need to come into this little bit of muzzle here with some grey for his whiskers, but I can't do that until I've obviously put the white of his muzzle on here. There's a little bit of shadow around here that we need as well, so this will get a tiny little wash on just in this bit here. It was actually grey. You probably can't see that, but it was grey originally. The other bit I'm going to do while I'm here is this bit. Because I've got this fine brush, I can now get this fine hair, and we did the dark bit here. So now I can get these fine hairs under here, and I can perhaps, I just need a little bit more medium, make it a bit more fluid, so I can now blend those into here as well. Okay, let's finish the face. So we mentioned we had a little bit of a white tufty bit that he's got just there, and he's got the same over on this side. It's almost like his little sort of eyebrows that he's got that are there. And then these bits, you see we're following that direction again. You see why it needs to be quite strong, because if we do it as a glaze, it's just going to blend into underneath. So I'm not going everywhere with it, I'm just making this suggestion of this white hair that's on the top of here. And these are quite straight actually, they're not necessarily crisscrossed over. It looks like he's obviously been at the hairdressers before he came for this photo shoot. Don't need massive amounts, but you do need that little bit there, and he's got tiny little highlights under here and this little bit here as well. So don't undo all of the work that you've done with the shadows by just covering it with white. He's got this highlight up here as well. I'm going to start this side. So this is where he's got that white downy fur on the outside of his ears that makes it look like he's got a white outline to his ears. And then inside we've got these little tufty bits as well that definitely are higgledy-piggledy. They're all over the place. So he's got these sort of tufts of long old hair. Okay, we're nearly seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here. Some long old bits going over here, and then a few of these. You may need to go back over this just to darken some of those areas. Got a big old white bit on the end of his brush here, so some of the white elements there. Okay, I think we're happy with that. So then this is where we pick up just some of these hairs that are just getting the highlight here. And you can always push them with your finger if you think that they're just too bright. I wouldn't worry too much. Now, you see what's beginning to happen? These are actually guard hairs, so what you end up with, quite a lot of animals like this have a downy coat right next to the skin that keeps them warm, and then they've got almost like 3 layers. So they've got the main layer of fur that's on there, and then they have what's called guard hairs, and the guard hairs are there to keep the rain out. And that's what these kind of things are on here. So when you're starting to do this, this is critical, and it's the last thing that you're doing, but it's critical that you follow that direction, because it's that that's giving this direction here, and these are laying over the muscles. And you notice I'm not covering the whole thing, but I am actually just, they're quite long as well, these. I am actually making sure that they are crossing over each other and that they're going in the direction that they're meant to be going in. So this starts to come down this way, whereas over here it's going up that way because it's following that sort of muscle as it goes. And if you find that you're not getting the detail on there, just roll your brush in the paint, and it may be that you need to add some more medium to it just to make it a bit more fluid. Now I could sit and do this all day, and quite frequently I do. But you probably have seen all that you need to see at this stage. I'm just going to finish this last bit off for you, and we're going to call it a day on that. And I'm going to just put the finished one back up so that you can have a look at the detail. So we're nearly finished on this bit. That's about right. We're just going to come down here. Just finish the last few bits. See, this is me to a T. I'll just finish the last two bits and then I'll spend the next half an hour faffing. We're going to go down there, finish that bit. This bit over here has got much more of this in, so we can actually do quite a bit more. He's obviously got a sort of white colouring on his back. Sometimes it's easier to turn this, so you may just even want to turn this that way up and find it's easier to work going downwards like this. You can put quite a bit of depth on that because he's got quite a bit of that colour on him. But they all are pointing that way. Don't forget to get up and walk around. I wouldn't expect you to do this in one sitting because it can be quite hard on your shoulders. Okay, last bit. Just very quickly. A little bit of medium. So that we've got ourselves a grey glaze. We're just going to go around there to darken that shadow. I'm going to darken this because it's a almost lost colour under there. He's got little bits around there. There we go. Little bits around there. You can see how much you can fiddle with here. Very last thing that we do is we get some black. Now if you've got a liner brush, a very fine liner brush, you could do this with a liner brush. I'm going to do this because he hasn't got many whiskers, but the whiskers are the last thing to go on. Now the other thing that you could do, if you've got really fine stringers, and we do pull really fine stringers at FiredGlass, so I quite often use stringers for this. I'm just going to put that round there, just tiny definition of, I know this is more than it actually shows on the picture, but you need a steady hand. He's got one that's coming out there. It's the last thing you would do because you don't want to be faffing about with whiskers and then realise that you've got more detail to put in. There we go. See, I'm going to darken that. I'm desperate to darken that. Just underneath there with the black. And that last little bit that we've now missed out. Somebody tell me to stop. I think we're done. Okay, I think that's more than enough for you to see sort of where we're going to get to. Let's grab this chap and bring it back. So not too shabby at all. I'm going to hold that there. You can see we're nearly there. I would probably spend, as you see I've done here. A little bit more time with the black, but essentially I think we're pretty much there. We've covered all the techniques that you need to be able to do this and create this little chappie. Let's put him back down here. And when he's fired, you've got no gaps at all. So all I've done there, midnight blue. I actually sifted a little bit of sea green enamel on here, and then I used some black frit, excuse me, to kind of create that hedgerow in the background. So it's, I suppose it's a summer's evening where it's just going dusk, but really to get that background in was just a little bit of black confetti glass, black stringers, little powder pro to create the trees and the shrubbery. But effectively, that's my little fox. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you want more details, have a look at our e-book on painting with enamels. If you want more details about the paint, don't forget to have a look at the other videos that we've got that talks about that. But I'm looking forward to seeing what you do and seeing what you decide to paint. Happy painting. Don't forget to subscribe, and I hope we see you on the next one. Take care. Bye.